sound of zip ties snapping shut in total darkness is a noise you never forget, especially when you realize those ties were meant for your own wrists. My name is Leo, and if you think food delivery is just a tedious way to make some pocket change, listen to what happened to me on a freezing rainy night in November of 2023. I was working the late night shift for a popular food delivery app in downtown Chicago, navigating the empty, slick streets around 2:30 a.m. The city felt entirely dead, wrapped in a heavy, freezing fog that choked the street lamps. I was ready to log off and head home when a massive $70 order flashed on my screen. It was for a high-end sushi platter and several energy drinks, picking up from a late-night kitchen and delivering to an old, industrial section of the city. The payout was $35 due to a high tip, so despite my grinding exhaustion, I accepted it instantly. The GPS led me away from the bright neon of the commercial district and into a grim, run-down neighborhood dominated by monolithic, concrete public housing and half-abandoned high-rise apartments. I pulled my car up to the destination, a towering, 15-story concrete apartment block that looked completely derelict. Half the windows were shattered or boarded up with rotting plywood, and the exterior courtyard was littered with rusted shopping carts and broken glass. The delivery notes were strangely specific. Elevator is broken. Walk up to the 9th floor, apartment 912. Do not leave the food downstairs. I am disabled and cannot walk. Knock 3 times so I know it is you. A heavy sense of foregone dread settled deep into my chest as I looked up at the dark, imposing building. There wasn't a single light on in any of the windows, but the sheer size of the tip kept me moving. I grabbed the thermal delivery bag, stepped out into the biting wind, and pushed through the heavy, rusted metal entrance doors of the building. The lobby was freezing, smelling heavily of damp concrete, stale urine, and old garbage. Just as the note stated, the elevator doors were warped shut and covered in graffiti, forcing me to find the emergency stairwell. The heavy fire door groaned loudly as I pushed it open, stepping into a narrow concrete shaft illuminated only by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb on the ground floor. As I began my long climb up the concrete steps, the light quickly vanished, plunging me into a thick, claustrophobic darkness. I pulled out my phone and switched on a flashlight beam, my breath rising in thick white plumes in the freezing air. The echoing sound of my own sneakers against the concrete steps felt unnaturally loud, filling the narrow stairwell with a rhythmic, haunting cadence. By the time I reached the 5th floor, the absolute silence of the building began to feel suffocating. There were no sounds of televisions, no muffled voices, nothing, just the cold wind howling through shattered window panes in the hallway. When I finally reached the 9th floor, my legs were burning from exhaustion and sweat was trickling down my neck. I stepped out into the long, narrow corridor. The floor was covered in peeling linoleum, and the ceiling tiles were sagging from old water damage. I shone my phone light down the hallway, searching for apartment 912. The doors were unmarked and rusted, but I finally spotted the faded plastic numbers 912 hanging crookedly near the very end of the hall. I walked up to the door, took a deep breath to calm my racing heart, and knocked exactly 3 times just as the instructions had requested. I stood there waiting in the dark hallway, the rhythmic dripping of water somewhere down the hall filling the silence. For a whole minute, there was no response. I was just about to set the food down on the floor and sprint back to the stairwell when I heard a slow, heavy, scraping sound from the other side of the door. The heavy metal deadbolt clicked open with a loud, echoey snap, and the door slowly swung inward into total pitch-black darkness. "Hello, food delivery," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I shone my phone light into the entryway. The light revealed an entirely empty, gutted apartment. There was no furniture, no carpets, and the drywall was stripped bare down to the wooden studs. Just as I realized something was horribly wrong, a massive, heavy hand suddenly reached out from the darkness behind the door frame, violently grabbing the front of my jacket and ripping me forward into the pitch-black apartment. I stumbled blindly over a piece of debris, dropping the sushi platter as the heavy metal front door was violently slammed shut behind me. The loud, definitive click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the dark room like a gunshot. Blind panic completely seized my mind. I scrambled to my feet in the dark, frantically swinging my phone light around the empty room. My heart stopped as the bright beam illuminated two tall, heavily built men standing directly between me and the exit. Both of them were wearing dirty tactical vests and heavy black ski masks that completely concealed their faces. In the hand of one man was a long, thick roll of industrial zip ties and a roll of heavy gray duct tape, while the other man was holding a heavy, solid iron crowbar. They didn't say a single word. They just began to slowly, systematically advance toward me in the dark, their heavy combat boots crunching loudly on the shattered drywall, dust on the floor. "Hey, take my wallet. Take my car keys. They're in my pocket," I screamed in absolute hysteria, backing away until my shoulders violently hit the cold concrete of the back wall. The masked man with the crowbar suddenly lunged forward, swinging the heavy iron bar directly at my head. I ducked instinctively, and the crowbar smashed into the drywall right above my ear, sending a shower of white plaster dust into my eyes. Utilizing the sheer, raw adrenaline of a trapped animal, I lowered my shoulder and charged directly into the stomach of the second man, the one holding the zip ties. The impact caught him completely off guard, throwing him backward on the floor with a loud grunt. I didn't hesitate for a single millisecond. I scrambled over his thrashing limbs, frantically reached for the door handle, and twisted the manual deadbolt open just as the first man swung the crowbar again, grazing my shoulder with a blinding flash of pain. I burst through the door into the 9th floor hallway, sprinting down the corridor with a speed I didn't know I possessed. Behind me, the heavy, frantic thud of combat boots echoed out of the apartment as both men gave chase. I threw myself into the emergency stairwell, practically flying down the concrete flights 3 steps at a time in the dark, my phone light cutting wildly through the shadows. I could hear them running down the levels above me, their heavy breathing and curses echoing through the narrow concrete shaft. I reached the ground floor lobby, slammed my weight against the heavy exterior metal doors, and burst out into the freezing night air. I sprinted straight to my car, threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and roared out of the courtyard, my tires screeching wildly against the wet asphalt. I drove straight to the nearest police precinct, my body shaking so violently from the adrenaline crash that I could barely speak to the desk sergeant. When the police raided the 9th floor of the building an hour later, the 2 men were long gone, but they found a disturbing setup inside apartment 912, a single metal chair placed in the center of the room, surrounded by dozens of industrial zip ties, heavy trash bags, and a digital video camera mounted on a tripod in the corner. The investigation revealed that the phone used to place the sushi order belonged to a burner SIM card, specifically used to lure isolated gig workers into empty buildings for violent robberies or worse. I deactivated my delivery app that very night, and to this day, I refuse to ever enter an apartment building or walk up a dark flight of stairs, because every time I hear the sound of plastic clicking or heavy boots on concrete, I am instantly dragged back to that pitch-black 9th floor. The terrifying realization that you are being deliberately hunted doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in a series of small, chilling clues until it's almost too late to run. My name is Marcus, and during the summer of 2022, I was a 22-year-old college student making deliveries in a wealthy, heavily forested suburb of Seattle, Washington. It was a Thursday night around 1:15 a.m. when I received a $40 order for a large family-sized bucket of fried chicken and several sides from a 24-hour fast food joint. The delivery address was located in a remote, upscale residential pocket deep inside a dense valley of ancient cedar and pine trees. The drive took me off the main suburban avenues and onto a winding, unlit two-lane asphalt road that cut straight through the dark wilderness. The trees out there were so massive and dense that they completely blocked out the moonlight, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of absolute blackness in front of my high beams. After 10 minutes of winding deeper into the isolated woods, my GPS instructed me to turn on to Whispering Pines Court, a secluded half-mile-long cul-de-sac that supposedly contained 3 massive luxury estates. As my tires crunched onto the dark asphalt of the cul-de-sac, the GPS signal suddenly glitched out completely, the screen flashing wildly before displaying a cold message. GPS signal lost. Proceed to destination manually. I slowed my car down to a crawl, shining my headlights into the dense tree line, looking for a house number or a driveway. The cul-de-sac felt unnaturally dead. There were no street lamps, no ambient lights from distant homes, and the towering trees seemed to press in heavily from all sides. Finally, at the very end of the loop, my headlights illuminated a massive, modern architectural home made of dark wood and glass, sitting back in a deeply shaded driveway. The entire house was completely dark, with absolutely no lights turned on inside or out. I checked the delivery notes on my phone, which read, "Drive up the long gravel driveway to the very back of the property. Leave food on the black wooden table next to the rear detached garage. Do not knock, baby is sleeping." A cold knot of unease formed in my stomach as I looked up the long, narrow gravel driveway that wound past the side of the dark house into the pitch-black backyard. Every single survival instinct in my body told me to leave the food at the front mailbox and drive away, but the $40 payout was a massive amount of money for me at the time. I threw the car in a drive, slowly pulled up the gravel path, and parked right next to the massive detached wooden garage at the back of the lot. The moment I turned off my engine, the silence of the forest was absolute and suffocating. I grabbed the heavy, greasy bucket of chicken, opened my car door, and stepped out into the damp, freezing night air. The smell of wet pine and rotting earth was incredibly thick. I pulled out my heavy tactical flashlight, shining the bright white beam around the dark backyard until I spotted the black wooden table sitting right against the heavy, sliding doors of the detached garage. I walked over quickly, my sneakers crunching loudly on the loose gravel, and set the food down on the table. As I pulled out my phone to take the mandatory confirmation photo for the app, my flashlight beam naturally drifted across the side windows of the detached garage. My breath instantly caught in my throat, and a cold wave of pure terror washed over my entire body. Inside the dark garage, parked perfectly straight, was a beat-up old white cargo van with its side doors wide open. But that wasn't what terrified me. Standing right next to the van inside the garage, looking directly through the glass window pane at me from just 3 feet away, was a tall, skeletal man. He was wearing a filthy, tattered gray jumpsuit, and his face was entirely covered by a crude, handmade burlap sack mask with 2 unevenly cut eye holes. In his right hand, he was holding a long, rusted steel machete that gleamed faintly in the edge of my flashlight beam. We froze in a terrifying, silent standoff for 2 agonizing seconds. I couldn't breathe, my muscles completely locked by sheer adrenaline. Suddenly, the masked man didn't run at the glass. Instead, he slowly lifted his left hand and pointed his finger directly past my shoulder toward the long gravel driveway behind me. I spun around instinctively, swinging my flashlight beam back toward the narrow exit path, and my heart violently shattered against my ribs. At the very entrance of the long driveway, blocking my car's only escape route, was a second figure. This one was shorter, heavily built, and wearing the exact same horrifying burlap sack mask. He was standing perfectly still in the center of the gravel path, holding a massive, heavy iron log-splitting axe across his chest. I was completely boxed in. The realization that this entire $40 delivery was a highly coordinated ambush hit me like a physical blow. Behind me, the heavy glass window pane of the garage violently shattered into thousands of pieces as the first masked man smashed his way out, stepping through the broken frame onto the gravel with a loud, aggressive crunch. "Hey, back off. I don't have anything," I screamed, my voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek of pure panic. I dropped my phone in the dirt, scrambled wildly toward my car door, and threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors just as the man with the machete lunged at my passenger side window, violently slamming the heavy steel blade against the reinforced glass with a deafening crack. I frantically shoved the key into the ignition, twisted it as the engine roared to life, and slammed the car into drive. I didn't care about the man with the axe blocking the driveway. My brain had switched to pure, primal survival mode. I stomped on the gas pedal, and my sedan launched forward down the narrow gravel path, tires spinning and kicking up a massive cloud of rocks. The masked man with the axe stood his ground until the very last possible second, violently swinging the heavy iron axe directly at my front windshield as I barreled toward him at 40 miles an hour. The heavy iron head of the axe struck the upper passenger side corner of my windshield, completely shattering the glass into a massive spiderweb pattern and showering the interior with sharp shards. But the sheer momentum of the car threw the man violently into the thick bushes by the side of the path. I tore out of the driveway onto Whispering Pines Court, my car sliding wildly on the dark asphalt as I pushed the vehicle to its absolute limits, flying down the unlit forest road until I finally reached the bright, welcoming lights of a busy 24-hour state highway. I pulled into a crowded gas station, my hands shaking so violently that I could barely turn off the ignition, and collapsed over the steering wheel, sobbing from pure, unadulterated terror. The local sheriff's deputies investigated the massive glass property an hour later. They discovered that the luxury home was a vacant foreclosure that had been empty for over 6 months, and the white cargo van inside the garage was stolen from a nearby town. Inside the van, police found multiple sets of handcuffs, blood-stained tarps, and a notebook containing the logged delivery schedules of various apps in the area. The two masked predators were never caught, having dissolved back into the deep, dark wilderness of the valley. I deleted every single gig worker app from my phone that very morning, and to this day, I refuse to ever drive down a dead-end road or enter a forested area after dark, because every time I hear the sound of gravel crunching outside a window, my blood turns to absolute ice. There's a specific type of absolute darkness that exists only underground, a heavy, suffocating blackness where no one can hear you scream, no matter how loud you try. My name is Derek, and during the winter of 2021, I was a 23-year-old food delivery driver working the grueling graveyard shift in a rural, historic town in upstate New York. It was a bitterly cold Tuesday night around 3:15 a.m., and a massive blizzard was just beginning to dump inches of thick, heavy snow over the deserted roads. I was freezing, exhausted, and desperately wanting to head home to my warm bed when a final delivery request popped up on my screen. It was a small order, just a single large container of hot chicken soup and a hot tea from a late-night diner. But the payout was unusually high because of the severe weather bonus. The delivery address was located on the far outskirts of town, down an old historic road known for its massive, colonial-era farmhouse properties that sat hundreds of yards back from the main road. I accepted the order, picked up the hot food, and drove through the blinding, swirling snowstorm, my windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the heavy flakes. After a slow, treacherous 20-minute drive, I finally reached the destination, a massive, decaying 3-story colonial estate built in the early 1800s. The house was a terrifying sight. Its white paint was peeling off in massive sheets. The wooden front porch was sagging dangerously, and the entire property was surrounded by overgrown, skeletal oak trees that clawed at the dark, stormy sky. There was a single, dim yellow light bulb burning weakly over the front door, but the rest of the massive house was pitch black. I pulled my moving truck up to the edge of the driveway and checked the delivery app notes for specific instructions. The text read, "I'm an elderly woman with severe arthritis and cannot come to the front door. Please take the food around to the back of the house. There is an old wooden basement cellar door that is left unlocked. Walk down the stairs into the basement kitchen and leave the soup on the counter. The tip is on the table." A cold wave of profound hesitation washed over me as I read those words. Walking into a dark, unknown basement of an old house at 3:30 in the morning sounded like the opening scene of a horror movie, but I rationalized that it was just a helpless old woman who needed her hot food in a terrible storm. I grabbed the thermal bag containing the soup, stepped out into the knee-deep snow, and began the long, freezing walk around the side of the massive house. The wind was howling aggressively, blowing snow directly into my face as I navigated the dark, slippery backyard. Finally, my flashlight beam illuminated the entrance to the cellar. Two heavy, angled wooden doors built directly into the stone foundation of the house, held shut by a simple iron latch. I walked over, my boots sinking into the fresh snow, pulled the cold iron latch back, and lifted one of the heavy wooden doors open. A blast of foul, musty air immediately rushed out of the dark opening, smelling heavily of wet dirt, rotting wood, and a strange, sweet chemical odor that made my stomach turn. I shone my flashlight beam down the dark, narrow flight of steep stone steps that led directly into the subterranean basement. "Hello, food delivery," I called out into the dark opening, my voice instantly swallowed by the whistling wind. There was no response, just the faint, distant clicking sound of a radiator somewhere deep inside the old house. I took a deep breath, gripped the frozen stone wall for balance, and began to slowly descend the steep stairs into the absolute darkness below. The temperature dropped instantly, the air feeling heavy and dead. When my boots hit the cold concrete floor at the bottom of the steps, I swung my flashlight around the massive, cavernous basement. It was a terrifying space. The ceiling was supported by massive, rough-hewn wooden beams covered in thick cobwebs, and old rusted farm tools were hanging along the rough stone walls. I searched for the basement kitchen mentioned in the notes, but all I saw were dusty storage crates and old broken furniture. I walked deeper into the cold room, my flashlight beam cutting through the thick dust motes, until I spotted an old wooden table in the far corner. I walked over quickly, set the bag of food down, and looked for the promised tip. There was nothing on the table except for a small, folded piece of dirty paper. I picked it up, unfolded it under my flashlight beam, and my blood turned to absolute ice. Written in thick, frantic black marker were the words, "He's not an old woman. Run." Before my brain could even fully process the sheer terror of those words, a loud, violent crash echoed behind me. I spun around instantly, my heart hammering like an explosion against my ribs, and shone my light toward the cellar entrance. The heavy wooden door I had left open had been violently slammed shut from the outside. A second later, the distinct metallic sound of the heavy iron latch being slid into place echoed through the stone walls, followed by a loud, deep click of a padlock snapping shut. I was completely locked underground. I ran up the stone steps in pure, unadulterated hysteria, throwing my entire body weight against the heavy wooden doors, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. But the thick wood didn't budge a single millimeter. I was trapped in the freezing, pitch-black dark. Just as I dropped my flashlight in a panic, the bright white beam rolled across the concrete floor, illuminating the far, dark corridor of the basement that led toward the upper house stairs. From the darkness of that hallway, I heard the slow, heavy creak of a wooden floorboard, followed by a terrifying, low, guttural human chuckle. Someone else was down there with me. I scrambled down the stone steps, grabbed my flashlight, and frantically shone the beam down the narrow corridor. My breath caught in my throat as the light illuminated a towering, heavily built man stepping out from behind a concrete support pillar just 20 feet away. He was wearing a filthy, blood-stained plastic butcher's apron over a heavy winter coat, and his face was entirely hidden behind a rusted, metal welding mask with a dark glass visor. In his right hand, he was slowly dragging a massive, heavy iron meat cleaver across the concrete floor, creating a horrific, high-pitched, screeching sound that echoed through the small basement space. He didn't rush. He began to walk toward me with a slow, mechanical pace, knowing that I had absolutely nowhere left to run. Blind panic completely took over my survival instincts. I didn't try to fight. Instead, I ran to the furthest, darkest corner of the basement, scrambling behind a massive pile of old wooden crates and a rusted iron furnace, pressing my back flat against the freezing stone foundation wall. I turned off my flashlight, plunging myself into an absolute, suffocating darkness, and held my hand tightly over my mouth to stifle my frantic, sobbing breaths. Suddenly, a deafening explosion of sound shattered the silence as the heavy wooden cellar doors above were violently smashed inward by a massive fire axe. The local state troopers, who had been tracking a rogue signal from a series of recent delivery driver disappearances in the county, had tracked my truck's live GPS to the property. The moment the bright flashlights of the state troopers flooded the basement, the masked killer fled up the interior stairs into the upper levels of the house, escaping into the blizzard through a back window before the police could secure the perimeter. The troopers dragged me out of that concrete hellhole, freezing and hyperventilating, but alive. The subsequent forensic investigation of the colonial mansion revealed a horrific discovery. The house had been abandoned for years, and the cellar was used as a literal slaughterhouse for stranded travelers, containing the remains of 2 other missing delivery drivers from the previous month. I survived that night by pure luck, and to this day, I refuse to ever make a delivery or enter a basement room after dark. I still don't know if I did the right thing. What would you have done if you were me? Tell me in the comments. Every time I hear the sound of metal scraping against concrete or a padlock clicking shut, my heart completely stops, and I am instantly dragged back to that freezing, pitch